Hello again, Scott Wagner from ReachTheRight.com, and this is part 2 of a Richard Rorty treatment of philosophy. And I'm thrilled to be doing this. I'm always excited to talk about Richard Rorty's work. This one has to do with irony. Rorty had a concept of people being ironists. He believed integrally that irony was a really important part of life. And you know, normally when we think of irony, we think of a Planned Parenthood executive that gets pregnant accidentally, or we think of a driving instructor that dies in a car wreck or something like that. Rorty thought of it much more sort of mechanically, as if everything that we did had an ironic component to it. And I'll get into his approach with it a little bit, but I want to talk to you about it just a little bit from psychology. Carl Jung, someone I'm pretty familiar with, he talked about a very similar concept, and the way he talked about it was the balance between the subconscious and the conscious mind. And if the conscious mind did things, tried to do things that took a tremendous amount of psychic energy, and including people that sort of go beyond the pale with an idea, they work too hard at it. You have this compensatory effort by the subconscious to undo what the conscious mind is doing. And this gets really close to the notion that Rorty gets at philosophically with the concept of irony. It's kind of a karmic idea, but it's driven internally in our own machine, so that we have a natural sort of capability to kind of work against ourselves all the time while we're trying to achieve things. And irony especially comes up when people are working too hard at something. You know, the notion of sin, the word sin in the Greek comes from being off the mark. And off the mark in the sense that you're trying to chase something that isn't entirely appropriate for your psychic machinery at that given time, whatever it is. And so as a result, you have unintended actions that occur, and you have to deal with it, and it's very uncomfortable. Now, the example that I use from a sociological perspective in the write-up is Lenin. And, you know, I have a lot of respect for Lenin. You know, we'd probably agree on Lenin, but Lenin is a guy who really cared for the proletariat. And he had this model of living that he drug a lot of subconscious problems into, you know, his method of Marxist-Leninism, you know, that he incorporated. And so he had this kind of cruelty aspects, and his moral approach was just a little bit over the top to try and achieve the kinds of things that he wanted to do for the proletariat. So one of the first things he does after the revolution is he kills a whole bunch of capitalists, right? And you know, when you read Marxist literature, capitalists are the big evil. So that's what he did. He killed them. And then, you know, the ones he didn't kill, they fled. 3 years later, he's in a potato field, you know, with a bunch of potato farmers, begging them to develop capitalist skills, admitting that he was wrong, you know. And then a year after that, he goes public just saying, hey, you know, we're going to do this temporary capitalism thing. And they instituted sort of private farms and all kinds of things on a 5-year plan that Stalin eventually squashed. The point being is that you know, the famine that they went through during their early history and all these other problems that they had with collectivism and so forth were highly related to his missing the mark or going overboard with his moral approach. And he ended up, you know, getting completely blindsided by this tremendous need. And he was such an intellectual guy, it's just completely amazing that he missed it, but he did. And that's a good example of how irony comes in and defeats our own purposes for us unwittingly. So I'm going to go through a few other examples in politics specifically and political communication. The freedom to influence elections through money is a freedom, right? But over time, ironically, it could end up being a situation where we reduce freedom because as a society we make the wrong choices when we're being essentially motivated through monetary considerations to change laws or not change laws, etc. So that's a classic sort of irony that's occurring. On the left, we have occasionally, or some of us, we have a myopic obsession with taking care of the poor and suffering. It's okay to take care of the poor and suffering. It's a good thing to do that. But if we go overboard, if we don't pay attention to the economic engine that has to underline the payments that we're doing, if we don't pay attention to the really, really key motivational signals that we send to our poor and suffering when we take care of them, if we don't take care of the efficiency of the delivery of the services, if we pick the wrong services, or we're just not really careful about the services that we deliver, we just want to take care of them, and then you end up with this ironic snapback that occurs in that you're going to be able to take care of far less poor and suffering people because you mismanaged it. It's very, very natural in a way, and karmic in a way. Now, more deaths are caused by morally motivated actions than immorally motivated actions, and you have to kind of look at the large wars to think about that. But that's actually a well-known fact in psychological studies, not particularly debatable in my opinion, and it illustrates this concept of irony, that we're trying to do all this good, and it's the best way we can to figure out how to do what's bad. And it's an overarching principle that comes up again and again, and actually systematically is what Rorty contends. And then Christianity, and I'll just take one example from Christianity, just to be nice, but Pharisaical teachings. Jesus spent a tremendous amount of real estate in the New Testament talking about, going into great detail about the sin of Pharisees, the people that killed him, the Jewish leaders who basically cynically turned and broke all of their own precepts in order to go after him. And you would think, I would think, as an outsider looking at the New Testament, that something on the order of 10%, 12%, 14% of sermons would be about Pharisaical problems, especially because it comes at it from so many different angles. There's a lot of ways to approach that sin. I have been to thousands of sermons. I have never heard a single sermon that was addressing explicitly Pharisaical teachings. Why is that? Well, it's natural, because the guy or the woman that it's really pointed to is the one that's doing the speaking. And they're not really keen on doing a whole lecture about this great evil that they could be themselves. So I understand it from a human behavior standpoint. The irony is that this sort of 12-14% of sin from Jesus' standpoint is completely ignored in many congregations across America, across all different kinds of Christianity. And so what do we have? We have a problem with Pharisaical behavior that occurs over and over again, because we're under-teaching in this ironic way this very important teaching of Jesus. So, any end justifies the means behavior has an ironic snapback component. Ken DeLay, who was the Speaker of the House for a little while in the late 90s, good example of this, built a very strong Republican engine. The guy was obsessed with doing that because of his values, but he pushed it too hard and made moral compromises, got in bed with Abramoff, cynically kind of used some Christian people too to get to funnel money around in funny ways to control a sort of casino empire, ended up going to jail, ended up deteriorating the Republican Party's leadership for, 7 or 8 years really. I think you could directly go back to what happened as a result of Ken DeLay's missing the mark, going too far. Another one that I want to mention is consumerism. And this is a little bit different take on ironic, so see if you can hang with. We choose as a society to be consumerist. We may not do it consciously, at least we meaning the consumers, but we have an engine, an economic engine, that is kind of obsessed with, fanatically obsessed with consumption. And there are arguments that we should certainly have a plethora of different products, and I'm not arguing about that. My point is that the society makes choices, that we spend our time and energy buying things, and we identify with the products through the aggressive marketing that we do in our society. There's an ironic snapback to that, because most people, when they look at a consumerist society, would think that there's a lot of freedom going on. There's a plethora of choices. And that's true. But actually, there's an ironic reduction of freedom that's happening because everybody's working so they can buy something and spending an enormous amount of time and energy identifying with the products that they buy. I'm a Toyota man. I'm an iPhone man. Well, that's fine. But when you do that, you're basically reducing the freedom that you have in your life to chase other goods. And we made that decision as a choice, as a society, to sort of do that by the choices we made in terms of the structure of our economy and so forth. Finally, I just want to make a point that I often make with liberals, because this has reached the right, so I'm talking to liberals. And this is an ironic point about our openness. There are two different types of openness. One is what I would term an academic type of openness. And this one employs Descartes' error aggressively. It's the notion of being addicted to facts, addicted to using our intellect on the left, which we often do. And we are well known for being open, and we know it about ourselves too. We often go into conversations thinking that we're being open, but in reality, we're employing Descartes' error of depending very, very heavily on our intellect and not really recruiting the emotional intelligence aspect of listening, say, the emotional aspect of openness, so that we're hearing things and they're going on a shelf somewhere. And what tends to happen is they gather dust and they don't have a label on them, and when it comes time to use those things, we're not ready to use them because we didn't fully use our true openness capabilities as human beings to hear, understand, comprehend, and bring it in. There's a real irony here, okay, because although most people think that the liberals are more emotional, and they are by most measures, but I find that when I speak with conservatives, that they are integrally understand that listening is a matter of recruiting their emotions as well as their intellect. In fact, they'll even talk down the intellect, which is kind of another way of talking up the emotional aspect. And when I talk to people, when I try to persuade them concerning ideas and they're liberals, I have to employ all these tricks to try and get the emotional side of them recruited. And it's very, very difficult because we're not used to it a lot of times. And so that's an ironic situation, because by not listening but thinking that we are, we create a justification for a closed mind. And we end up being closed as a matter of course. Do you understand the snapback idea there? Good. Okay, so the notion of irony as endemic to our lives always helps us to look for the ways that our overt chasing of whatever goal can cause the exact opposite to happen. And we should get good at that in our personal lives and also obviously in our conversations. Knowing that even a little bit of excess will generate some kind of ironic snapback like that can help us to watch what we're doing and be balanced in our lives. Now, a lot of people listen to that when I say this, and they think, well, wait a minute, I'm not going to be a moderate, I'm not going to stand in the center all the time. And that's not the point at all with irony. Okay, remember the pragmatist lesson. Everyone has their own responsibility to carve out what is true for you. And I have friends that are froth at the mouth, way, way left. And I have a few friends that are way, way, way right, and a lot of people that are centrist, flopping back and forth or being a little bit left, a little bit right. Everybody has a place in society, believe it or not. And you have to find your own place. But When you find that place, whether you're in the business of slashing tires of bad guys, or you're in the business of praying for people so that they do the right thing, or you're just in the business of quietly going and doing charity every Saturday afternoon, you have to watch your own place to figure out what the center is for you, so that if you go too far on any given point, if you miss the mark, and you notice this ironic snapback that happens in some way, you can adjust yourself. You can pull back to your center and be the most efficient political animal, say, that you could be. All right? Thank you very much for listening. Talk to you next time.